In the far corner of an aging mansion stood an antique mirror taller than any person in the house. Its frame was carved from dark, heavy wood, twisted into shapes that almost looked alive. Thin vines curling around faded faces, symbols etched so deeply they seemed burned rather than carved. No one in the family remembered who had bought it. It had simply always been there, leaning silently against the bedroom wall at the end of the hallway. The mansion itself was old enough to groan at night. Floorboards creaked without footsteps. Doors shifted in their frames as if breathing with the house. But the mirror felt different. While the rest of the house showed its age openly, cracked paint, dusty corners, peeling wallpaper, the mirror's glass remained strangely flawless. Not a single scratch disturbed its surface. It reflected the room too clearly, almost sharply, as if reality inside it were more focused than the real world. Visitors often felt uneasy standing before it. They couldn't explain why. Some said their reflections looked tired. Others claimed the mirror made the room appear slightly darker than it truly was. When sunlight entered through the window, it never seemed to fully brighten the reflection. At night, when the hallway lights were turned off and silence settled over the mansion, the mirror seemed to deepen in color. Its surface no longer looked like glass, but like a dark pool of still water. If someone stood very close, they might feel a faint chill in the air near it, cold enough to raise goosebumps. And sometimes, in the quietest moments, it almost felt as if the mirror was not simply reflecting the room, but watching it. Aisha was 14 when she first began to feel that something about the mirror was wrong. It wasn't fear at first, just a quiet, persistent awareness. The mirror stood directly across from her bed, meaning it was the first thing she saw every morning and the last thing she saw before sleeping. At first, she thought her unease was simply because the mansion itself was old and unfamiliar. But the feeling grew stronger each day. Sometimes, while brushing her hair, she would catch herself staring into her own eyes for too long. There was something slightly off in the reflection, something she couldn't name. It wasn't different enough to notice immediately, but different enough to disturb her. The reflected room seemed a shade dimmer. The corners behind her looked deeper, like shadows stretched farther inside the glass. One evening, as golden sunset light filled her bedroom, she stood before the mirror and raised her hand slowly. Her reflection followed perfectly. She tilted her head. The reflection did the same. Everything normal. And yet, her chest tightened for no reason. She stepped closer. For a brief second, so quick she almost convinced herself she imagined it. Her reflection seemed to hesitate. Just a flicker. A delay so small it might have been her eyes playing tricks on her. But her heart began to pound. That night, lying in bed, she kept glancing toward the mirror. The darkness in its surface felt thicker than the rest of the room. She pulled her blanket up to her chin, annoyed at herself for being childish. "It's just a mirror," she whispered. But deep down, Aisha no longer felt certain of that. The first time it happened, Aisha thought it was just the weather. At exactly 11:59 p.m., while she was lying awake in bed, the air in her room shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It was subtle, like the quiet exhale of something unseen. Her digital clock glowed red in the darkness. 11:58, then 11:59. A faint mist began to spread across the mirror's surface. Aisha slowly sat up. Her windows were closed. The fan was off. The night was neither cold nor humid. Yet the glass of the mirror fogged from the inside, a thin layer of pale vapor forming at its center and spreading outward like slow-moving breath against winter air. She swung her legs off the bed, her heartbeat steady but curious. Condensation, she murmured to herself, though she didn't know from where. The fog thickened. It didn't cover the entire mirror at once. Instead, it pulsed. A small circle cleared near the center, then fog returned. Clear again. Fog again. In, out, in, out. Aisha froze. The mist was moving in a rhythm. It wasn't random. It wasn't drifting. It was expanding and shrinking with careful timing, like lungs filling and emptying. Her eyes darted to the clock again. 12 a.m. The fog abruptly vanished. The mirror returned to its flawless, calm surface, reflecting her dimly lit room as if nothing had happened. For several seconds, Aisha simply stood there, staring at her own wide eyes in the glass. Then she whispered the thought she didn't want to think. That wasn't condensation. That was breathing. The next night, Aisha did not sleep. She sat upright in her bed, knees pulled to her chest, eyes locked on the glowing red numbers of her clock. 11:57 p.m. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the old wall clock outside in the hallway. Her breathing felt loud in her ears. 11:58 p.m. The air in the room seemed heavier than usual, pressing gently against her skin. A strange chill crept along her arms, raising goosebumps. 11:59 p.m. Right on time. The mirror fogged again. This time, the mist formed faster, thicker, denser, swirling in slow spirals across the surface. Aisha didn't move. She forced herself to watch. Then she heard it. At first, it was barely noticeable, a soft sound hidden beneath the silence. She leaned forward slightly, straining to focus. There it was again, a slow inhale. Faint, deep, as if someone were standing just inches behind the glass, drawing breath through unseen lungs. Aisha's throat tightened. The fog pulsed in perfect rhythm with the sound, expanding with each inhale, shrinking with each exhale. The mirror was not just misting, it was responding. She slid off the bed, her feet touching the cold floor. Step by step, she moved closer. The sound grew clearer. It wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from inside the mirror. She pressed her ear toward the glass, her heart hammering violently. For one horrifying second, the breathing stopped. Silence. Then, a sharp, sudden exhale blasted against the other side of the glass, fog exploding outward violently. Aisha stumbled back, gasping. The breathing continued. Slow, steady, waiting. The next morning, Aisha went straight to her parents. She hadn't slept at all. Dark circles framed her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. They were sitting at the breakfast table, sunlight streaming through the windows as if nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. There's something in my mirror, she said quietly. Her mother paused mid-sip of tea. In your mirror? It's breathing, Aisha whispered. Every night at 11:59. The glass fogs up from the inside. I can hear it. I swear I can. Her father exchanged a quick glance with her mother before giving a soft, reassuring smile. You've been watching too many horror videos again. I'm serious, she insisted, her voice rising. It breathes like a person. I heard it. I felt it. Her mother reached across the table and touched her hand. Old houses make sounds, beta, pipes, wind, wood shifting, and mirrors fog because of temperature changes. There's always a logical explanation. But the windows were closed, Aisha said. The fan was off, and it happens at the exact same time every night. Her father chuckled lightly. Our brains are very good at imagining patterns. The conversation ended there. That afternoon, her father even checked the mirror. He tapped the glass, examined the frame, and shrugged. Perfectly normal, he declared. But when Aisha returned to her room, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. In the center of the mirror, faint but visible, was a handprint. From the inside. And it was not. That night, Aisha decided to test it. If her parents were right, then everything had an explanation. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe fear was making her see delays that weren't there. At 11:58 p.m., she stood directly in front of the mirror, her room completely silent. The only light came from the faint blue glow of her bedside lamp. Let's see, she whispered to herself. She lifted her right hand slowly. Her reflection copied the movement perfectly. She lowered it. Perfect again. Her heart pounded harder as the clock turned to 11:59 p.m. The mirror fogged instantly. Aisha didn't look away this time. She raised her hand again, slowly, carefully, watching every detail of her reflection. For a split second, nothing happened. Her real hand was already halfway up before the reflection began to move. The delay was small, less than a second, but undeniable. Her breath caught in her throat. She quickly dropped her hand. The reflection held its position for just a fraction longer before lowering too. Cold terror flooded her body. No, she whispered, shaking her head. She forced herself to try again. She tilted her head sharply to the left. This time, the reflection tilted slightly later, almost as if deciding to follow her. Her chest tightened painfully. The girl in the mirror stared back at her, not mimicking, observing. Then, slowly, without Aisha moving at all, the reflection's lips began to curl upward, into a smile, wider than her own. Aisha did not smile. Her lips were trembling, slightly parted in fear. But the reflection in the mirror was grinning. At first, it was subtle, a gentle curve at the edges of its mouth. Then the smile stretched wider and wider, too wide. The skin at the corners of the reflection's lips seemed to pull unnaturally, as if it were not bound by the limits of flesh. The grin reached toward its cheeks, thin and sharp, exposing teeth that looked just slightly longer than they should be. Aisha stumbled back a step. "I'm not doing that," she whispered. The reflection didn't blink. It stood perfectly still, except for that horrifying smile slowly widening across its face. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She raised her trembling hand toward her own mouth, touching her lips to prove they were not smiling. They weren't. But in the mirror, the other Aisha's grin deepened. Then something worse happened. The reflection leaned forward, not in sync with her, not copying her movement. It leaned closer to the inside of the glass, as if pressing toward her world. The fog pulsed around its face with each slow inhale. And then, it blinked. Aisha hadn't. The reflection's eyes closed and opened deliberately, almost lazily, as if amused. A soft cracking sound echoed through the room. A thin fracture appeared at the corner of the mirror's surface, spidering outward slowly. The reflection's smile stopped widening. It froze in place, and in a voice that did not move its lips, Aisha heard a whisper, "Let me out." The whisper still echoed in Aisha's ears when the temperature in the room suddenly dropped. It wasn't gradual this time. It was instant. A wave of icy air swept across her skin, biting through her clothes. Her breath became visible in front of her face, thin white clouds forming with every shaky inhale. The warmth that had filled her bedroom only moments ago was gone. The mirror's surface darkened, as if absorbing the little light that remained. Aisha wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently. The floor beneath her bare feet felt like frozen stone. Frost began creeping along the edges of the mirror's frame, thin veins of white spreading outward across the carved wood. The reflection still stood there, smiling, unmoving. Another breath filled the glass from the inside. Fog bloomed outward in a perfect circle around the reflection's face. In, out, in, out. The cold intensified with each pulse. The lamp beside her bed flickered weakly, its light dimming and brightening in uneven bursts. Shadows along the walls stretched longer than they should have, twisting unnaturally as if trying to crawl toward the mirror. Aisha tried to step backward. Her legs felt stiff, heavy, like the cold had locked her joints in place. The air itself felt thick, hard to breathe. Then she noticed something horrifying. The frost wasn't only spreading across the frame anymore. It was spreading outward, across the wall behind the mirror, like something inside was freezing its way through. The reflection's grin slowly faded. Its eyes widened, and for the first time, it looked hungry. The lamp finally went out. Darkness swallowed the room, leaving only the faint red glow of the digital clock. The shadows along the walls did not disappear with the light. They grew. At first, Aisha thought her eyes were adjusting, but the shapes on the walls were shifting, stretching upward like thin fingers. The shadow of her wardrobe bent at an unnatural angle. The outline of her chair twisted slowly, as if something unseen were pulling it from another direction. The mirror pulsed again. In, out, in, out. Each breath from inside the glass made the shadows tremble. Aisha tried to move, but her body felt rooted to the floor. Her heart pounded painfully against her ribs. She forced herself to look away from the mirror, but the shadows were worse. They were no longer copies of objects in the room. They were independent. One long, thin shadow peeled itself from the wall beside her bed, stretching across the ceiling like spilled ink. Another crawled upward from the floor, bending in sharp, unnatural angles, reaching toward the mirror as if answering a silent call. The temperature dropped further. Frost began forming along the corners of the ceiling. The breathing grew louder, not just from the mirror, from everywhere. Aisha slowly turned back toward the glass. Her reflection was no longer alone. Behind it, inside the mirror, tall, dark shapes stood in the background, featureless, watching. Their forms blurred in the fog, but their presence was undeniable. The shadows in her room stopped moving. They pointed toward the mirror. And then, all at once, every shadow snapped back to its place. Silence fell, except for the breathing. Closer now. The breathing stopped. For one terrifying second, the room became completely silent. Aisha's ears rang in the sudden absence of sound. The frost along the walls froze in place. The shadows no longer moved. Then she felt it. A pull. Not on her body, but on her reflection. Her eyes snapped to the mirror. The other Aisha was no longer smiling. It was staring directly at her hand. Slowly, trembling, Aisha lifted her right hand toward the glass. This time, the reflection did not follow. It simply watched. Her fingertips were inches from the surface when the mirror rippled. Like disturbed water, dark waves rolled outward from the center, bending the reflection unnaturally. The glass was no longer solid. It shimmered, fluid and alive. Aisha gasped but didn't pull back. She needed to know. Her fingers touched the surface. Instead of cold hardness, her skin sank slightly inward. The mirror was soft, wet, like plunging her hand into icy water. She tried to jerk her hand away, but something grabbed her from the inside. A sharp, freezing grip wrapped around her wrist. Her reflection's hand had moved. It had reached forward and locked onto her. The version of her inside the mirror stepped closer, its face inches from the surface, eyes wide and filled with something ancient. The grip tightened. Ice burned up her arm. Aisha. The reflection whispered without moving its lips. The glass rippled violently around her trapped hand. And slowly, the mirror began pulling her in. The grip around Aisha's wrist tightened until she felt her bones strain. The surface of the mirror churned like black water in a storm, swallowing her hand inch by inch. The cold was unbearable now, no longer just freezing, but piercing. It felt like thousands of needles stabbing into her skin. She screamed, but the sound came out wrong, muted, as if the air itself were swallowing her voice. The reflection's fingers dug deeper into her wrist, long and unnaturally thin. They did not look fully human anymore. The skin on its hand seemed stretched too tight, almost translucent, with dark veins crawling beneath it. Behind the reflection, the tall, shadowy figures stepped closer. Their shapes became clearer, featureless faces, elongated limbs, bodies bending in impossible angles. They surrounded the other Aisha as if waiting for something to be delivered. For so long, the reflection whispered again, though its lips never moved. A sharp crack split the air. A fracture spread across the mirror's surface from where their hands touched, spidering outward in jagged lines. But instead of weakening the glass, the cracks glowed faintly, like veins of pale light. A second hand suddenly pushed against the inside of the mirror. Not Aisha's reflection this time. Something larger, darker. Its palm pressed flat against the rippling surface beside her trapped arm, stretching the glass outward. Aisha tried to pull back with all her strength. Her feet scraped helplessly across the frozen floor. The mirror pulled harder. Her elbow disappeared beneath the surface. The reflection's smile returned. And in the darkness behind it, something else was finally pushing through. Aisha screamed again. But this time, she realized something horrifying. She couldn't hear herself. Her mouth was open wide. Her throat burned from the force of it. Yet the room remained silent. Not even an echo. The sound was gone. Swallowed. Her parents' bedroom was just down the hallway. If she could only make enough noise. She tried to shout their names. Nothing. It was as if the air had turned solid around her voice, trapping it inside her chest. Panic exploded through her body. Tears streamed down her frozen cheeks as the mirror dragged her further inward. Her arm was gone up to the shoulder now, submerged in that dark, rippling surface. The reflection leaned closer, its breath fogging the inside of the glass in slow, satisfied pulses. "You don't belong out there," it whispered silently. The shadows behind it began to move in unison. A low vibration filled the room, not a sound, but a feeling. The walls trembled slightly. The frost spread faster across the ceiling, creeping toward the door like white veins. Aisha dug her heels into the floor, grabbing desperately at the edge of her desk with her free hand. Her fingers slipped. The mirror's surface surged outward like a wave, swallowing her shoulder completely. Her reflection tilted its head, almost gently, and then the bedroom door rattled violently. For a split second, the pulling stopped. The mirror trembled. Aisha's silent scream continued. But outside her room, everything was perfectly quiet. The next morning, the house felt strangely normal. Sunlight poured through the windows. Birds chirped outside. The hallway smelled faintly of breakfast. Aisha's mother knocked on her bedroom door. "Aisha, wake up, you'll be late." No answer. She knocked again, a little harder this time. Aisha. Still silence. With a sigh, she pushed the door open. The room was cold. Not freezing, but noticeably colder than the rest of the house. Her mother frowned. Why is it so chilly in here? The window was closed. The fan was off. Then she saw the mirror. A jagged crack ran across its surface from top to bottom, splitting the glass like a lightning bolt. Smaller fractures branched outward, webbing across the reflection. But there was no broken glass on the floor. Not a single shard. The mirror remained perfectly intact within its frame. The bed was unmade. The blanket lay half on the floor. Aisha's slippers were near the desk, as if she had stood there the night before. But Aisha was gone. Her father searched the entire house. Every room, every closet, the attic, the backyard. Nothing. No sign of forced entry. No open windows. No explanation. Police were called. Questions were asked. Searches were organized. But the only thing unusual in the room was the mirror. Cracked. Cold. And when her mother stood in front of it, just for a moment, she felt something that made her step back in fear. She could have sworn the reflection behind the cracks had blinked, and it was not her daughter's eyes staring back. Days passed. Search teams came and went. Neighbors whispered. The house filled with heavy silence. But the mirror remained. No one dared to remove it. Aisha's parents avoided looking at it directly. They covered it with a sheet at first, but by the next morning, the sheet had fallen to the floor, though no window had been opened and no one had entered the room. On the fourth night after Aisha disappeared, her mother gathered the courage to step inside the bedroom alone. The air was colder again. The crack across the mirror had grown slightly wider, thin splinters branching outward like spreading veins. She stood there, shaking. "I want my daughter back," she whispered. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the surface of the mirror slowly cleared, as if wiped clean from the inside. The cracked glass no longer reflected the room behind her. It reflected somewhere else. Darkness. A long, shadowed hallway stretching endlessly backward. And at the center, a girl stood inside the mirror. Aisha. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. Her lips moved rapidly, as if she were screaming. But no sound came through. Her hands slammed against the inside of the glass, desperate, frantic. Her mother gasped and rushed forward. Aisha. The girl inside the mirror suddenly stopped moving. Her expression changed. The fear drained from her face. Slowly, too slowly, a smile spread across her lips. Behind her, tall shadows gathered, and the reflection leaned closer to the cracked surface. Breathing. In, out, in, out. A week after Aisha disappeared, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt occupied. The mirror was still cracked, but the fractures no longer looked accidental. They formed patterns now, thin lines branching like veins across living skin. Every night at exactly 11:59 p.m., the temperature in the hallway dropped. Her parents tried to ignore it. They failed. On the seventh night, her father finally decided to remove the mirror. "Enough," he muttered, lifting it carefully from the wall. It was heavier than it should have been. Colder too. As he turned it slightly toward the hallway light, the surface shifted. The crack lines faded. The glass became smooth again. And inside, Aisha stood perfectly still. Her face was calm. Too calm. She looked directly at him. Her chest rose and fell, slowly, deliberately, breathing. Her father froze. "That's not her," he whispered, because the eyes staring back were empty. Not scared, not trapped, waiting. Behind her, the dark hallway inside the mirror stretched endlessly. The tall shadowed figures stood further back now, barely visible, but present. Aisha lifted her hand. This time, her movement did not copy him. She placed her palm against the inside of the glass. The mirror's surface pulsed once. A faint fog formed where her breath touched it. In, out, in, out. Then, her lips parted, and in a voice that came from both inside the mirror and directly behind him, she whispered, "Now, I'm the one breathing."